"She has fallen," someone said in the bright, indifferent voice one might use to report a spilled glass, and no one moved. The Duke of Marchbank heard the words from the far end of the long gallery at Halverdine House, above the swell of the orchestra and the tinkle of 100 careless laughs, and something in the flatness of them turned him about before he had decided to move at all. A woman had gone down at the edge of the ballroom, near the cold draught of the tall windows, and around her the glittering crowd had drawn back the way water draws back from a stone, leaving her alone in a little island of empty floor. Aldous Vane, 7th Duke of Marchbank, had come to the Halverdine ball meaning to stay a half-hour and no more. He had come because his aunt had written him 3 letters, each fiercer than the last, telling him that a man could not bury himself at Marchbank forever, that grief was not a house one might live in, that the world would forget his face if he did not remind it he still owned one. He had come, and he had stood against a pillar of veined marble with a glass he did not drink, and he had counted the minutes until he might decently leave. He had not expected to be needed. He had forgotten, in his long seclusion, that anyone anywhere might need him for anything at all. Now he crossed the floor. He was aware, as he went, of the small ripples his movement made, the turned heads, the murmurs, the way a duke walking with purpose could part a room more surely than any footman's staff. He did not care for it. He had spent 4 years learning to care for very little. But he saw the woman on the floor, and he saw the ring of bright faces around her looking down with the mild, faintly annoyed curiosity of people watching a servant drop a tray, and he found that he cared after all for that. She was young. That was the first thing. Not a girl, but young, 4 or 25 perhaps, and she lay half on her side where she had crumpled, one arm folded beneath her, her cheek against the cold parquet. Her gown was grey, not the fashionable dove grey of a lady economizing with taste, but the honest, exhausted grey of a garment turned and mended and turned again, the grey of a poor relation, the grey of a woman who is given the colours no one else will wear. A wisp of dark hair had come loose from its plain knot and lay across her white face. She was not moving. For one cold instant, in the pit of him, he thought she might be dead, and the thought was a blade, because he knew too well how quickly the bright and living could become the still. "Give her air," the Duke said. He did not raise his voice. He had never needed to. The ring of onlookers loosened as if he had struck it, and a lady in primrose satin drew her skirts aside with a little moo, as though the fallen woman were something that might soil the hem. "It is only Miss Ashcombe," the lady said, to no one to the room, Lady Crail's companion. "She is forever wilting. I dare say she has laced too tight to look well among her betters." A ripple of thin laughter answered her, and it was the laughter, more than anything, that decided the Duke. He went down on one knee beside the woman without a thought for his breeches or the polished floor or the 200 pairs of eyes. Close to, she was paler than any laced too tight coquette. Her lips had no colour in them at all, and beneath her eyes lay bruised dark hollows that no vanity had put there. Her hand, when he touched it, was cold and thin, the knuckles reddened, the nails cut brutally short, a working hand. He turned it gently and felt at the wrist for the flutter of life, the way a groom feels a foundered horse, and for a long moment there was nothing, and then, there, faint and quick and frightened, a pulse. "She is alive," he said, and he heard how his own voice had changed, gone low and rough, and he did not care about that either. "She has fainted. She wants air and warmth and someone with the wit God gave a goose. Where is her mistress?" No one answered. He looked up, and across the ballroom he saw a woman he took to be Lady Crail, a handsome, hard-faced matron in bronze silk and a great many diamonds, turn her powdered head deliberately away and resume her conversation with a viscount, as one turns from a scene beneath one's notice. She had seen. He was certain of it. She had seen her companion drop, and she had chosen to see nothing. The Duke's jaw set. In 4 years of grief he had grown used to the world's small cruelties as one grows used to a draught in an old house, but there was something in this, in the grey gown, in the reddened hand, in the averted diamond-heavy head, that reached past his numbness and took hold of him. He shrugged out of his coat. It was a fine coat, black superfine, cut close by the best man in the kingdom, and he laid it over her shoulders as though it had been made for the purpose. Then he slid one arm beneath her knees and one behind her back, and he gathered her up against his chest and rose to his feet in a single smooth motion, and she weighed, he thought with a fresh cold anger, almost nothing at all. She weighed less than a child. She weighed like a person who has been giving away her share of the bread for a long, long time. The ballroom had gone quiet around him. He was aware of it distantly, the orchestra faltering, the whispers running out from him in every direction like cracks across ice. The Duke of Marchbank, who had not been seen in society these 4 years, who had refused every invitation and answered no letter, was standing in the middle of the Harvardine ball with a fainting companion in his arms and murder in his face. It would be the talk of every drawing-room by noon tomorrow. He found he did not care about that either, and it was almost pleasant, this not caring. It felt less like the old grey deadness and more like a kind of freedom. "You," he said to a footman who had appeared, wide-eyed, at the edge of the crowd, "a quiet room, a fire water, and send for whatever passes in this house for a woman of sense, a housekeeper, a maid, anyone who will not swoon at the sight of another's distress." The footman fled. The woman in his arms stirred. Her lashes trembled, her head turned against his shoulder, and then her eyes opened, grey eyes he saw, grey as her gown, but clear and deep, and for one unguarded instant utterly without defence. She looked up into his face with the drowned, disbelieving expression of a person waking somewhere she never expected to wake, and the Duke found he could not look away. "You must not," she whispered. Her voice was low and roughened and mortified. "You must not carry me. Put me down, sir, I beg you. I am quite well." You are not well," he said, "and I will not put you down." He said it as he said all things, as a fact settled long ago, and he felt her go still against him. And he saw the fright come into her clear grey eyes as she understood at last where she was and in whose arms and before whom, and he watched her try to shrink herself smaller, to fold herself away, to become the invisible thing she had plainly trained herself for years to be. "Please," she said. "Everyone is looking. My lady will. Please, sir, you do not understand. It will go so much the worse for me." "No one," said the Duke of Marchbank, in a voice that carried to the farthest corner of that silent room, "will trouble Miss Ashcombe tonight, or on any night hereafter, save through me." And he turned, with her held against his heart, and he carried her out of the ballroom, past the ring of powdered, painted, gaping faces, past Lady Crail and her diamonds and her averted head, and out into the cool dark of the corridor beyond, where the noise fell away behind them like a slammed door. The footman had found a room, a small morning parlour, disused at this hour, with dust sheets on 2 of the chairs and a low fire the man was even now coaxing higher with the poker. The Duke carried her to the settee nearest the hearth and set her down upon it with a care that surprised him, arranging his coat about her still. She sat rigid against the cushions, both hands pressed to her cheeks, and he saw that she was trembling all over, fine and constant, like a leaf on a wind. "I'm so ashamed," she said, very low, not to him, almost to herself. "I am so very ashamed." "You have nothing to be ashamed of." He drew a small hard chair from the wall and set it a decent 3 feet from the settee and sat, so that he might not tower over her. "You are ill and worn to the bone, and someone has let you become so. That shame is not yours. Look at me." She would not at first. She kept her eyes on her own reddened hands, twisting them in her lap, and the firelight moved on the pale plane of her cheek. Then, slowly, as if it cost her a great deal, she raised her eyes to his, and again he had the strange sensation of being seen, truly seen, without the wariness or the calculation or the pity with which the world had regarded him since the accident, since the year of black crepe, since he had shut the great doors of Marchbank on the whole living world. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would a gentleman such as yourself trouble himself over a companion who has made a spectacle of the evening? You do not know me, sir. No one there would have lifted a hand. Why did you?" And the Duke of Marchbank, who had answers ready for every impertinent question the world could put to him, who had made a fortress of his silences, found that he had no answer to this one at all, none but the truth, and the truth surprised him as it left his mouth. "Because no one else would," he said, "and because you looked lying there, exactly as I have felt these 4 years past, as though the whole bright room had agreed to step over you and go on dancing." He paused. The fire snapped. "I have grown very tired, Miss Ashcombe, of rooms that go on dancing." She stared at him. Something crossed her thin white face, not fear now and not shame, but a kind of startled recognition, as though he had spoken aloud a thing she had thought was hers alone to know. And in that small dusty parlour, with the ball roaring faintly on somewhere beyond the walls and the low fire painting them both in gold, the Duke of Marchbank felt the first crack run through 4 years of stone, and did not, this once, move to seal it shut. The door opened. A stout, sensible-looking woman in the black of an upper servant came in with a covered cup and a shawl, curtsied low, and looked from the pale girl to the coatless Duke with a swift, comprehending glance. "The kitchen sent hot wine, your grace, with sugar and a little spice, and I've a warm shawl here." She crossed to the settee. "Now then, miss, you gave us all a fright. Drink this down slow." Miss Ashcombe took the cup in both her cold hands and drank, and a little colour came at last into her lips, and the Duke watched, and was not aware how closely he watched until the sensible woman glanced up at him with the ghost of a knowing smile, and he made his face a fortress again out of long habit, and rose, and went to stand at the darkened window with his back to the small warm scene, and stared out at nothing, and felt his heart beat oddly, painfully alive. He learned her name that night, her full name, Meowen Ashcombe, from the sensible woman, who proved to be Halverdine House's own housekeeper, a Mrs. Pardew, and who lingered by the door after Miss Ashcombe had been persuaded to lie back against the cushions and close her eyes. "She's Lady Crail's companion, your grace, these 3 years and more," Mrs. Pardew said low, so the resting girl might not hear. "A cousin of some sort, orphaned young, taken in for charity, so the family says, though I've never seen charity work a body so hard. She's up before the maids and a bed after them, and eats what's sent back cold from the parlour if she eats at all. My own girls have slipped her bread more than once out of pity, for they've a fondness for her. She's gentle with everyone, even them that's beneath her, which is more than most so-called ladies can say." The housekeeper's mouth thinned. "She fainted at the Ellerbys rout a fortnight since, and at church a month before that. Nobody heeds it. Her ladyship says she does it for attention." Mrs. Pardew snorted very quietly. "I've buried a husband and 3 of my own, your grace, and I know a body starving on its feet when I see one." The Duke of Marchbank stood at the window and did not turn, but his hand tightened on the sill until the wood bit his palm. "Who is Lady Crail to her?" he asked. "Widow of Sir Osbert Crail, that was. Miss Ashcombe's guardian, by the reckoning of the will, her mother's cousin, and none too pleased to be reminded of it. There's a son, Mr. Julian Crail, and a daughter, Miss Sophia, that's to be brought out this season and married as high as her mother's ambition can reach." And Miss Ashcombe, the housekeeper's voice dropped further, "is the one that dresses Miss Sophia's hair and mends Miss Sophia's flounces and sits up with Miss Sophia's headaches and gets neither wage nor thanks, being family. It's a cruel word, family, in some houses." She glanced at the settee. "I'd not say so much, your grace, only you carried her out yourself, before them all, and it seemed to me a man who'd do that would want to know the truth of it." "You judged rightly," said the Duke. When Mrs. Pardew had gone to fetch more hot water, he stood a while longer with his back to the room, and let the housekeeper's words settle in him like stones dropping into a deep still pool. 3 years, up before the maids, bread slipped to her in peaty. He thought of his own vast, quiet house, of the fires kept burning in rooms no one entered, of the wine that soured in his cellars, because he would not host, of the abundance he lived in and did not taste, and he thought of a woman who fainted from want at the edge of a room full of feasting. And something in him that had lain cold and dead for 4 years began, painfully. He turned. Meowen Ashcombe lay against the cushions with her eyes shut and the firelight on her face, and asleep she looked younger and terribly tired, the fine bones of her too sharp beneath the skin. His coat still lay across her. He had a sudden fierce reluctance to take it back. Her eyes opened. She looked at him a moment without alarm, softened by exhaustion, and then memory returned and with it the shrinking, and she began to sit up. "Lie still," he said. "You are not going anywhere until you have slept and eaten, whatever Lady Crail may wish. I have told the household so." "You cannot tell my lady's household. I am a duke, Miss Ashcombe," he said without arrogance, merely as one states the weather. "It is very nearly the only use I have found for the condition. People do as I say. It has been until tonight a great tedium to me. This evening I begin to see its merits. Something that might, in a less depleted person, have become a smile ghosted across her mouth, and he found he wished very much to see the whole of that smile some day in daylight, when she had colour in her face. You are laughing at me, she said. I have not laughed at anything in 4 years, said the Duke. I would not begin with you. She was quiet a moment. Then, in the low, direct way she had, as though her exhaustion had worn through the usual coverings people keep over their thoughts. You said 4 years before. Twice now. What happened 4 years ago? No one asked him that. In 4 years no one had dared. The world knew and stepped around it, and murmured behind fans and left the subject wrapped in a decent dread. And here was a companion in a turned grey gown, half fainting, asking him plainly across a strange fire as though he were only a man, and he found that he wanted absurdly to answer. My wife, he said, and my daughter. There was a carriage, a bridge in the spring floods. The horses took fright. He said it in the flat, cauterized voice he had made for it, the voice that let him get through the words without the words getting through to him. They were 3 years married, and Eleanor 2 years old. I was to have travelled with them. A matter of business kept me a day, so I was not on the bridge, and they were, and that is the whole of it, Miss Ashcombe, save the 4 years since, which have been very quiet. She did not gasp, or press her hand to her heart, or offer him the smooth, cool coins of condolence that people had spent on him for 4 years, until he had come to loathe the very shape of the words. She looked at him steadily, her grey eyes full of something he had not been given in a long time, not pity, which looks down, but sorrow, which stands level, and she said, 2 years old, then she would be 6 now, and the Duke of Marchbank, who had walled up his daughter's nursery and forbidden her name in his house and thought he had buried the arithmetic of her forever, felt the number land in him like a blow, because it was true, because Eleanor would be 6, because no one else had ever once said it. Had ever once let his daughter go on quietly aging in the world instead of stopping forever at 2, and he had to turn again to the window because his eyes had blurred, and a duke does not weep before a companion he has known for 1 hour. Yes, when he could. 6. She would be 6. Behind him, very softly, Merwin said, I am sorry. I did not mean to wound you. Only, it seemed to me a cruelty, that the world lets you keep her at 2, when she would have grown. My mother has been 11 years gone, and everyone speaks of her as though she died a girl, and she did not. She was a woman with grey coming in her hair and a laugh you could hear across a field. I think the dead grow, if we let them. I think it is a kindness to let them. He stood at the window a long while. The garden below was black and formal, the box hedges silver-edged by a rising moon, and somewhere far off the ball played on, indifferent, gilded, going round and round. When at last he had command of himself, he turned back, and he looked at this strange, gentle, wrecked young woman on the borrowed settee, and he said, quite steadily, You are the first person in 4 years to say something true to me. Everyone else has said the correct thing. I did not know how sick I had grown of the correct thing until you did not say it. Merwin looked away, colouring faintly, and pulled his coat closer about her shoulders, as though she had only just remembered whose it was, and made as if to shrug it off. Your coat, sir, you will be cold. Keep it, he said, a while yet, and she stopped and kept it, and the small surrender of it did something warm and dangerous to him. Mrs. Pardue returned then with a tray, thin bread and butter, a little cold chicken, a cup of beef tea, and set it on the low table by the settee, and stood over the girl with folded arms until Merwin, under that motherly siege, began to eat. She ate slowly at first, and then, when the body's long-denied hunger woke and would not be governed, quickly, hands not quite steady, and the Duke made himself look at the fire and not at her, because there was something in the sight of her eating that was almost too private, almost too much like watching a wound bleed. And it fed the burning in him. There came a stir in the corridor and voices, and the door was opened without a knock, and Lady Crail came in. She was close to, exactly the woman her diamonds had promised. A bronze silk figurehead of a woman, handsome still, with a hard, clever face and eyes that took in the room in one flick, the fire, the tray, the coatless Duke, the companion swathed in ducal superfine with chicken on a plate. And the Duke watched Lady Crail's face form, in the space of a breath, a swift and practised transformation from cold fury to warm concern, like a lamp turned up. My dear Merwin, she cried, sweeping forward, you gave us all such a fright. I have been half distracted. I only just learned where they had taken you. Oh, your Grace, how can I thank you? She turned the full lamp of her concern upon the Duke, and dropped a curtsy of exquisite depth. The Duke of Marchbank. That you should have troubled yourself over my poor foolish girl. I am ashamed, truly, that you were put to such inconvenience. She has always been delicate. We indulge her sadly, I fear. Come, Merwin, up now. You have taken enough of his Grace's evening. She will stay where she is, said the Duke of Marchbank, until I am satisfied she is fit to be moved. The lamp of Lady Crail's face flickered. Your Grace is too good, but I could not dream of imposing. It is no imposition to me, he said, to see that a sick woman is not dragged from a fire into the night. It would seem, Lady Crail, that it is an imposition to you. He let the silence sit. He was very good at silence. He had had 4 years to practice it. How long has Miss Ashcombe been in your household? Why, 3 years, but I fail to see. And in 3 years has she been seen by a physician? Lady Crail's chin came up. The concern was slipping. The hardness showed through it like bone through a torn glove. Your Grace, with the greatest respect, the management of my own household is your own affair. Quite so. The Duke rose to his full height, and he saw Lady Crail, for all her diamonds, take an involuntary half-step back, for he was a very tall man and his stillness had always frightened those who trafficked in noise. And yet it becomes, in some small part, my affair, when your household falls at my feet in a public room and no one in it will lift her but a stranger. That was remarked, Lady Crail. It was remarked by 200 people. By tomorrow it will be remarked in every house in town. You will wish, I think, to have it said that you sent your own carriage and your own maid to convey Miss Ashcombe home in comfort, and that you called a physician to her the moment you reached your door. I only mention it, he added, mild as milk, because I intend to inquire. Lady Crail understood a threat when it was dressed in courtesy. She had dealt in such threats all her life. Her colour rose beneath the powder, but she curtsied again, deeper, and said that his Grace was all consideration, and that of course the physician should be called. And of course the carriage, and she was only too glad, and she gathered Merwin up with a show of tenderness so false the Duke could taste it, and swept her out, and at the door Merwin looked back at him once, over Lady Crail's bronze silk shoulder, one swift grey unguarded look. And then she was gone. He stood alone in the small parlour with the dying fire and the tray of crumbs, and he found he was holding his coat, which she had shrugged off at the last, and which held, faintly, the smell of lavender water and wood smoke and something that was simply her. He did not put it on. He carried it out over his arm, and he called for his own carriage, and he went home to Marchbank House through the sleeping streets, and he did not sleep at all. In the morning the world was, as he had foretold, entirely occupied with him. He learned this from his aunt, Lady Wexhampton, who arrived before he had finished a cup of chocolate. He had no appetite, sailing into his breakfast room in her morning purples with her lorgnette already raised. She was his mother's sister, a formidable dowager of 70, and the only living creature to whom he had never once in his life managed to say no. Aldous, she announced, you carried a fainting companion out of the Harvardine ball in your arms before the entire ton. And you did not stay to dance with a single eligible girl, and you left your own coat behind, and half of London believes you have run mad, and the other half believes you are in love, and I have come to discover which, because I am 70, and I will not be kept in suspense at my age. Sit down, aunt, said the Duke. Have some chocolate. I will not have chocolate. I will have an answer. But she sat because her feet hurt, and she fixed him with her sharp old eyes, which were the same grey as his own, the vain grey, and which had watched him all his life and were not fooled by his fortresses. 4 years, Aldous. 4 years I have written you and begged you and abused you, and you have sat in that great tomb of a house and let the moss grow over you, and I had begun to think you meant to die there without troubling to lie down first. And then in one night you tear the season in two over a poor relation in a grey gown. She leaned forward. So, which is it, mad or in love? Neither, said the Duke. And then, because she was the one person he could not lie to, and because he had been awake all night turning it over, he set down his cup and said, I do not know. I saw a woman fall and no one help her, and I could not. Aunt, she weighed nothing. She has been kept these 3 years by a cousin who works her like a scullion and calls it charity, and last night she fainted from plain want in a room full of people eating iced cakes, and not one of them, not one, would touch her, and I found I could not bear it. That is all. I do not know that it is love. I know that is the first thing I have not been able to bear in 4 years, and I have grown so used to bearing everything that being unable to bear something felt like. He searched for it, like waking. Lady Wexhampton was quiet for a moment, which was rare in her. Then she said, more gently than was her custom, "Tell me the whole of it." He told her of Merwin Ashcombe and Mrs. Pardew's account, and Lady Crail's averted head and false lamp face, and the number 6, and the true thing said across the fire, and his aunt listened and did not interrupt, and at the end she took a long breath and set down her lorgnette and said, "I knew her mother." The Duke looked up. "Anne Ashcombe. Anne Merwether, that was. The girl is named for her, I'd wager. That's an old family name on the mother's side. A lovely, gentle, laughing girl, and clever, and poor as a wren, and she married a curate for love, and they had nothing and were happy, by all I heard, until the pair of them died within a year of each other and left one small daughter and no money at all. And the child was passed about among cousins like a parcel none would frank, and I lost sight of her, and I am ashamed to say I did not trouble to find her, for I had troubles of my own that year." The old woman's jaw worked. Cordelia Crail. That woman was a Ridding before her marriage, and the Riddings would sell their grandmothers for a place above the salt. If she has that girl, she has her because it costs her nothing and gives her a free upper servant she can call family to save the wage. It is exactly what a Ridding would do. She struck the table with her fan. Anne Ashcombe's daughter fainting from hunger in a ballroom. I could weep, I could box the ears of the whole degenerate lot of them. "Then you will help me," said the Duke. "Help you do what, precisely?" His aunt's eyes narrowed shrewdly. "Have a care, Aldous. You are a duke, and she is a companion, and you carried her before the world, and if you now go about being seen to interest yourself in her without you mean marriage, you will not save her, you will ruin her. The very kindness that stirs you will be the stone they tie round her neck. Lady Crail will turn her off without a character, and the world will say what the world says, and that gentle girl will end in a far worse place than an unpaid governess, and it will be your doing, however you mint it. Kindness from a duke is not a small thing to a woman with nothing. It is a rope, and it may pull her out or hang her, and you had best know which you intend before you pull." The Duke of Marchbank sat very still. His aunt had said aloud the thing he had not let himself think in the long night, that his interest, unchecked, was itself a danger to her, that a man in his position could not simply be kind to such a woman as one is kind to a stray, and walk away, and leave her the better for it. There would be talk. There was already talk, and talk to a Merwin Ashcombe was not idle. It was livelihood and shelter, and the difference between a hard place and a ruinous one. "I do not know what I intend," he said at last honestly. "I have known her one evening. I will not play the fool who declares undying love to a stranger. That is a boy's game, and I am not a boy, and she deserves better than to be some grieving widower's cure. But I know this, aunt. I will not stand aside and let her be worked to death in that house, because standing aside is the discreet thing. I have been discreet for 4 years, and it has very nearly killed me. There must be a way to help her that does not harm her." Lady Wexhampton studied him for a long moment, and then something shifted in her old face, some private resolution, and she picked up her lorgnette again with the air of a general taking the field. "There is one way," she said. "It is the only respectable channel by which a duke may interest himself in a penniless girl without a breath against either of them, and it happens to be a channel I command. I shall take her up myself." She saw his look and waved it aside. "I am an old woman of unimpeachable position and notorious eccentricity, Aldous, and it will surprise no one that I have taken a whim to the daughter of a friend of my youth. I shall call upon Cordelia Crail, who cannot refuse a Wexhampton, and I shall declare that I require a companion of my own for the season, my eyes being what they are, and that Anne Ashcombe's girl will do very well, and I shall carry her off to my house in Grosvenor Square. I shall feed her, and physic her, and dress her, and no one on earth will find it strange. And you," she levelled the lorgnette at him like a pistol, "you may call upon your old aunt as often as a devoted nephew ought, which is very often, and there see whether what stirred in you last night is a passing fever or a lasting thing. And if it proves lasting, well, we shall cross that bridge." Her voice caught, just slightly, on the word bridge, and she reached across and laid her old hand o' his. "We shall cross it. Sit carefully, my dear. We know, you and I, what bridges cost." The Duke turned his hand and gripped hers, and for a moment neither spoke. Then he said roughly, "Thank you, Aunt. Do not thank me. I am enjoying myself hugely. I have not had a project in years." She rose brisk again, tucking away sentiment as she tucked away her handkerchief. "I shall call on the Crail woman this very afternoon. You will keep away, do you hear me, Aldous? Keep away entirely for a fortnight. Let the girl mend under my roof with no Duke hanging over her like a thundercloud. Let the world's tire itself out with no fresh meat. And when she is stronger and steadier, and the talk has cooled, then you may come and drink tea with your aunt and be introduced to her companion like any civil gentleman, and we shall see what we shall see." At the door she paused and looked back, and the sharpness in her face had gone soft and old and sad. "You look better this morning than you have looked in 4 years, Aldous. Worse slept and worried half to death, and better. Grief is a house, you were right in that. But a house is not a grave. It has doors." And she went out, purple and imperious and suddenly dear to him beyond speaking, and left him alone with the cold chocolate and the first real hope he had felt since the spring the bridge went down. The fortnight was the longest the Duke of Marchbank had passed since the year of black crepe. He kept his word, he kept away. But he did not keep his mind away, and that proved beyond his governing. He rode out each dawn on the heath, and found himself composing, against his will, small speeches to a grey-eyed woman who was not there. He took up books he had not opened in 4 years. He walked one grey afternoon to the door of the nursery wing he had ordered locked, and stood before it with the key in his hand a long while, and did not open it, but did not, this time, walk away in the old sick haste. He stood and let the ache come, and thought of a woman who had said the dead grow if we let them, and went away at last quieted rather than torn. He wrote his aunt every second day, brief careful notes inquiring after her health, and every second day she wrote back, briefer still, wickeder, telling him nothing he wished to know and everything to torment him. The girl improves. Ate an egg. The girl sleeps 12 hours together, poor lamb. The girl has a laugh, Aldous, when she forgets to hide it, did you know? You would like it. That is all you shall have of me today. He learned, from these maddening scraps and from Lady Wexhampton's fuller account when at last the fortnight ended, how it had gone. His aunt had descended upon Lady Crail like weather. She had admired Miss Sophia's complexion and Mr. Julian's whiskers and Lady Crail's new hangings, and then over the third cup of tea she had let fall, as an old woman's whim, that she had known a Miss Ashcombe was of the household, Anne Merewether's girl, was it not? And that her own companion had lately left her to be married, and that her eyes being what they were at 70, she found she wanted a gentle-voiced girl of good blood to read to her and answer her letters and bear her company, and that it had struck her as a very pretty solution that Anne's daughter might do. Lady Crail, Lady Wexhampton reported with relish, had been caught in a vase of her own making. To refuse a Wexhampton was unthinkable. To admit that the girl was too useful to spare would be to admit the girl was a servant, and the whole precious fiction of charitable family would come down. And so, trapped between her greed and her pride, Lady Crail had chosen pride, and pressed Merwin upon the dowager with a great show of reluctant generosity. Dear Merwin, quite one of the family, they should miss her sadly, but if it would oblige dear Lady Wexhampton, and be an advantage to the girl. And thus Merwin Ashcombe had been carried off to Grosvenor Square in the Wexhampton carriage with her one small trunk, and had not, said the dowager, stopped looking over shoulder for 3 days, as though someone would come and take it back. She does not know how to be idle, his aunt told him. It frightens her. The first morning she up at 5 and had my whole silver cleaned before the footman rose, and wept when I scolded her, thinking I meant to send her back for insolence. Insolence? The child apologized for being useful. The old woman's voice had roughened. I have had to teach her to sit still, Aldous. I have had to teach a grown woman that she is allowed to sit by a fire and do nothing and not be beaten for it. It has taken me a fortnight and she still starts up whenever a door opens. What was done to her in that house was not honest cruelty with a whip. It was worse. It was 3 years of being made to feel she was a debt, could never be paid, and a shame that must never be seen. That is a slower murder, and it goes deeper, and I do not know how long it will take to undo. But she is undoing. She laughed yesterday, twice. And she has read me the whole of a novel in the evenings in a voice like water over stones, and I have not the heart to tell her I read it 40 years ago. I like to hear her have it. She had looked at him then, shrewd and soft at once. You may come to tea on Thursday. But mind me, Aldous, go gently. She is a wild thing half tamed, and if you come at her like a duke wanting a cure, you will send her back into the thicket. Come like a man, and a quiet one, and let her come to you. He came on Thursday. He had dressed with more care than he had troubled over in 4 years, and despised himself for it, and dressed carefully all the same. She was in the small yellow morning room of the Grosvenor Square house, and he saw her before she saw him, framed in the doorway a moment in the pale spring light, and he had to stop and steady himself against the frame, because she was so changed and so much herself. The fortnight had put a little flesh on her. There was colour in her face now, a soft living colour, and the bruised hollows beneath her eyes had gone. She wore a gown of pale blue-grey his aunt had plainly ordered for her, plain still, for she would not have finery, but new and whole and cut to her, and her dark hair was dressed simply and shone. She was kneeling on the hearthrug feeding a saucer of milk to his aunt's ancient fat spaniel, laughing down at the greedy old creature, and the laugh was exactly as promised, low and warm and unguarded, and the Duke of Marchbank stood in the doorway and understood, with a plunging quiet certainty that frightened him, that this was not a passing fever after all. Then she looked up and saw him, and the laugh stopped, and she rose in a flurry, and colour of a different kind came into her face. "Your Grace," she said, and dropped a curtsy, and did not meet his eyes. "Miss Ashcombe." He came in. "I hope I do not disturb you. My aunt commanded me to tea." "She commands, and I obey. It is the settled order of our house." He kept his voice light and easy and did not tower, and drew a chair a decent distance off, exactly as he had in the dusty parlour, and after a moment she sat too on the edge of the sofa, hands folded, wary as a bird on a sill. "I hope you are recovered," he said. "Entirely, thanks to her ladyship's great goodness, and to yours, sir. She stopped, and made herself go on, and he saw what it cost her plain-spoken pride to say it. "I have not thanked you. That night I was so ashamed I could hardly speak, and then I was carried off, and you spared me a great humiliation, your Grace, and perhaps a great deal worse, and you have never let me thank you for it." "Then do not thank me now," he said. "It spoils the tea." And she looked up, startled, and caught the dry gleam in his eye, and the ghost of the ballroom smile touched her mouth again, fuller this time, and he thought, there. His aunt came in then, and rescued them both, and tea was brought, and under the old woman's cheerful, ruthless generalship the awkwardness thawed. Lady Wexhampton talked of everything and nothing, drew Merwin out about the novel they were reading, disputed its merits with her, appealed to the Duke to settle the argument, knowing full well he had not read it, and delighted wickedly in his floundering, until Merwin forgot herself enough to laugh at him outright, and the sound of it did something to the whole room, warmed it. The way the first real fire of autumn warms a house that has been merely shuttered against the cold. He came the next Thursday, and the one after. He came for tea and stayed for supper. He read the novel, so that he might dispute it properly, and found himself arguing its ending with her across his aunt's table with a heat he had not felt about anything in years, and she gave him no quarter. She had opinions, this gentle worn girl, strong, quiet, clear ones, on books and on people and on the world. And she offered them to him plainly once she had learned he would not punish her for them, and he found he lived, between one Thursday and the next, for the moment she would offer him another. He learned that she loved the country and pined in town. He learned that she had taught herself Latin from her father's old books by candle ends, because no one had thought a poor girl worth a governess. He learned that she saved crusts, still, unthinking, tucking them into her pocket at table, and that when she caught herself doing it she flushed scarlet with shame, and he learned to look away and pretend he had not seen, because it wrung his heart, that small hoarding hand. There is more to be told of the weeks between, for the road from that first cold ballroom floor to the gold light of the wedding was not so short nor so smooth as the telling of an ending makes it seem. and much of what bound the Duke of Marchbank to Merwen Ashcombe was made in small hours and small rooms that no scandalmonger ever saw. There was, for one, the matter of the physician's visit, in those first days at Grosvenor Square, which the Duke did not witness but heard of afterward from his aunt, and which lodged in him and would not leave. Lady Wexhampton, alarmed the girl's continued frailty, had sent for her own Dr. Enderby, a shrewd, gruff, kindly old man who had physicked her these 30 years, and he had examined Merwen and come out to the dowager grave. There was no disease, he said. There was no consumption, no fever, no failing organ. There was only the plain, slow ruin of long undernourishment and longer overwork, and a body that had been running on nothing but nerve and duty for 3 years and had at last, mercifully, been given leave to stop, and had promptly collapsed under the weight of everything it had been holding up. Feed her, he had said. Feed her and let her sleep, and stop asking anything of her whatsoever, and in 3 months you will not know her. The body mends quicker than the mind in these cases, my lady. It is the mind I would watch. A creature kept small so long forgets it was ever any other size. She will fight you when you try to make her well. She will apologize for the trouble of her own recovery. That is the wound, and it is deeper than the flesh, and there is no draught for it but time and kindness, of which your ladyship appears most unusually to have a supply. The old dowager had repeated this to the Duke word for word, and he had gone home and sat a long time in the dark, thinking of a mind that forgets it was ever any other size, and of his own 4 grey years, and of how very like the two of them were, the starved companion and the grieving Duke, each having forgotten there was any larger life than the small cold one they had been given, each needing only, in the end, to be reminded. There was the matter, too, of the first time Merwen laughed at him, and did not immediately look afraid. It had been on the 3rd or 4th Thursday, over some absurdity of his aunt's, and the Duke had made a dry remark, and Merwen had laughed, the low, warm, helpless laugh, and then he had watched the old reflex seize her, the instant snatching back of it, the flinch. The way a beaten dog cringes even from a raised hand that means only to stroke it, as though laughter were a thing she would be punished for, and the Duke, understanding, had done a thing that cost his pride nothing and his heart a great deal. He had gone on, deliberately, saying one absurd thing after another, quite gravely, as though he had not noticed her flinch at all, until she was laughing again despite herself, and then again, and the 3rd time she did not snatch it back, and he saw her realize, with a kind of wonder in her face, that no blow had fallen, that she had laughed 3 times in a ducal drawing-room and the sky had not come down, and he had thought that small victory worth more than any battle. He had said nothing of it, then or ever, but he had ridden home lighter than he had ridden in years. And there was the night of the storm, which perhaps did more than any other single thing to make plain to him the whole size of what he felt. It had been at Marchbank on one of the country visits, and a great summer storm had come up in the night, the kind that walks across the heath on legs of lightning and shakes the old house to its bones. The Duke had never minded storms. He had been raised in that house, and its thunders were old friends, but he had been unable to sleep, and had come down for a book, and had found the library not empty. Merwen was there in a wrapper, a candle guttering beside her, curled very small in the great chair by the cold hearth with a book she was not reading, and at each roll of thunder she flinched, and he understood at once, before she could hide it, that she was frightened, and that she had crept down here alone to be frightened rather than trouble anyone, rather than wake a maid, rather than be a bother even in her terror, and that this too was the wound, the forgetting that she was allowed to need. He had not made a great matter of it. He had come in quietly, and said, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, that he could not sleep either, and had come for a book, and would she mind the company, and she had said no in a small voice, and he had lit the fire. It was summer, but the storm had chilled the room, and more than that he had wanted the light and warmth for her. And he had taken the chair opposite, and he had begun, unhurried, to tell her about the storms of his boyhood, the great one that took the east chimney, the one that flooded the ha-ha and drowned his father's prize gander, the games he and his brother had played counting the seconds between flash and thunder to reckon how far off the lightning walked, and little by little, under the plain steady flow of his voice, he had watched her uncurl. He had watched the fear go out of her, watched her stop flinching, watched her begin at last to smile at his boyhood follies, and then to answer with follies of her own. The curate's daughter who had loved a storm, she confessed, who had used to slip out to stand in the rain when her father was at his sermons. Until the day she was caught, and there was no one left after that who would let a child do anything so joyously foolish. And the Duke had listened and had thought, watching her face come alight in the fireglow with the storm walking harmless now beyond the windows, that he would give the whole of Marchbank and every acre and every stone of it to be allowed to sit in a firelit room and hear this woman talk until he died. They had stayed till the storm passed and the grey dawn came, and nothing had happened, nothing that the strictest chaperon could have named. Only two people talking by a fire through a storm, and yet everything had happened, and he had known it, walking her to the foot of the stair as the birds began, that he was lost, wholly and gladly lost, and would never again be found except in her. These were the things the world did not see, and could not have understood if it had seen them, for the world measured love in settlements and titles and the disposition of estates, and had no instrument fine enough to weigh a laugh not snatched back, or a fear talked gently away through a summer storm. But the Duke of Marchbank measured by these things now, having learned in the 4 grey years how little the other kind was worth, and by these measures he was, long before he spoke of it, the richest man in England. He had spoken of none of it to his aunt, and had not needed to, for Lady Wexhampton had eyes in her head and 70 years of using them, and she watched the two of them through that green spring and said her sharp nothings and thought her shrewd thoughts, and privately, in the citadel of her own heart, gave thanks. She had feared, when she first took up the project, that she was merely finding her broken nephew a nurse, a gentle creature to soothe his grief and warm his cold house, and that there would be no true meeting in it, only need on his side and gratitude on hers, which is a poor mortar for a marriage. She had watched to see if that were all it was, and she had seen over the weeks that it was not, that the girl gave him quite as good as she got, argued him to a standstill over the endings of novels, refused to be awed by him, refused to be grateful in the small cringing way that would have flattered a lesser man and disgusted this one, and met him more and more as her strength returned, plainly and squarely as an equal, the one thing his rank had denied him his whole life long. That was the thing the dowager had not dared hope for, and had scarcely believed when she saw it, that Aldous, who could have any woman in the kingdom and had wanted none, had found the one woman in the kingdom who did not want him for being a duke, and could not be made to, and loved him. When at last she let herself love him, purely and stubbornly for the plain difficult man inside the title. It will do, the old woman had said to her spaniel, watching them dispute across the garden below her window. It will do very well. I may die easy now, which is a great convenience, for I have a great many affairs to settle, and had begun to worry there was no time. And she had gone down to make more mischief, and to feed the girl another egg. Yet even these were not the whole of the courtship, for love, when it grows in earnest, grows in 100 unremarked hours, and there were among them some the Duke of Marchbank kept afterward like coins in a private purse, taken out and looked at when he wished to remember exactly how it had been to fall, at 37, into the thing he had thought was finished with him forever. There was the afternoon of the ledgers, which taught him she was not only gentle but formidable. It had come about by accident. His steward at Marchbank, old Barrow, had died in the spring after 40 years' service, and the man he had trusted to keep the great estate's accounts had gone with him, and the Duke, who had let all such matters slide in his 4 grey years, signing what was put before him without reading it, had come one wet afternoon to the estate room to make some sense of the muddle, and had made none, and had sat glowering at a wall of leather-bound ledgers he could not decipher, when Merwin, sent to find him for tea, had come upon him there. She had glanced at the open book over his shoulder, not presuming, only curious, and had gone very still, and then said, in an odd, careful voice, "Forgive me, but these figures do not answer. This column here, and this. Someone has been carrying a false sum forward, 3 years at the least. Look, the rents are entered right, but the total set down below them is short, always by a little, never so much as to be noticed in a single year, but it compounds." And the Duke had looked, and had seen nothing but figures, and had said as much, and Merwin had flushed and said that she was used to figures, that she had kept the household books at the Krail house, all of them, the tradesmen and the wages and the marketing, for 3 years. Because Lady Krail could not be troubled and Miss Sophia could not add, and that she had a way of seeing when a column lied, and she had sat down without quite meaning to, and taken up a pen, and within the hour she had found it. A slow, patient embezzlement by the under-steward Barrow had trusted too far, a man who had reckoned on the young steward's death and the Duke's inattention, and had been quietly bleeding the estate for 3 years, and she had laid it out so plainly that even the Duke could follow it. The whole cheat naked on a single sheet in her small clear hand. He had sat back and looked at her across the ledgers, flushed, absorbed, a smear of ink on her wrist, entirely without fear now that her mind had a task worthy of it, and he had felt something turn over in him that was not tenderness but something nearer to awe. "You found in an hour," he said slowly, "what 4 other men have missed for 3 years, and you learned it keeping accounts for a woman who worked you like a servant and paid you nothing." Merwin had gone shy again at once, put down the pen, begun to apologize for presuming, and the Duke had reached across and set his hand over the inked sheet, not to take it, but to keep her from crumpling it in her sudden diffidence, and had said, "Do not you dare be sorry. I have a mind to make you my steward. I have a mind to make you a great many things." And she had looked up, and their eyes had held over the ledgers a beat too long, and both had looked away. But he had thought, there is a whole country in her that the Krails never troubled to visit, whole provinces of her they used for kindling, because they could not be bothered to see what she was. "And I shall spend my life exploring it and never come to the end." The under-steward was dismissed and the loss recovered, and the Duke never afterward signed a paper his Duchess had not first read, and the Marchbank estate prospered under her hand as it had not prospered in a generation. And the county said what a fortunate thing his Grace had married so managing a woman, never guessing they had it exactly backward, that the woman had been the making of the estate and not the other way about. There was, too, the morning she rode. She had confessed she could not. There had been no horse for a poor relation, and she had gone everywhere on foot or not at all. And the Duke, who loved horses better than most men and had loved them less since the bridge, had found in this a thing he could give her that cost her no debt and him nothing but pleasure, and he had taught her himself, on the gentlest old mare in his stables, in the paddock behind the walled garden, through a fortnight of fine mornings. It had been slow work. She was frightened at first, and he had been endlessly patient, walking at the mare's head, his hand on the bridle, talking her calm exactly as he had talked her calm through the storm, and then less frightened, and then, one bright morning, when he had let go the bridle without telling her, and she had gone half the length of the paddock before she noticed she was riding unheld, she had laughed aloud, a whoop of pure startled joy, and turned in the saddle to find him, to share it. Her face blazing with a delight so unguarded and so young that the Duke, standing in the wet grass watching her go, had felt his throat close. He had thought of all the mornings of her life in which there had been no joy, no whoop, no one to turn and share it with, and he had thought of all the mornings he meant to give her, and he had lifted his hand to her across the paddock, and she had lifted hers back, and the old mare had ambled on with the 2 of them grinning at each other like fools across the dew, and his aunt, watching from an upper window with her spaniel, had said, "Ah," very softly, and gone away and left them to it. And there was the evening Lady Wexhampton told them her own story, which the Duke had never heard entire, and which bound the 3 of them the closer for the telling. It had been late. After supper, the 3 of them by the fire, and Merwin had asked the Dowager, gently in the plain-spoken way she had that made people tell her things, whether she had never married, for she had always been Lady Wexhampton, an old maid of great estate. And the girl had wondered, but never liked to ask, and the old woman, mellowed by the fire and the wine and the sight of the 2 young people happy, had told them that she had loved, once at 19, a man without fortune, a soldier, and that her father had forbidden it and married her instead to a rich old lord she did not love, for the family's advantage, exactly as the Krails meant to marry Sophia, exactly as the world had always married its daughters, and that her soldier had gone to the wars and died there, and her old lord had lived 20 joyless years and died too, and left her rich and free and alone, and that she had never loved again, and had made of her freedom what she could, and had grown into the sharp, rich, formidable old woman they knew, who ruled drawing rooms and feared no one and was. Underneath it all, she said, looking into the fire, a girl of 19 still, who had wanted a poor soldier and been made to take a rich lord, and had never once in 50 years stopped wishing she had run. So you see, she had briskly blinking, why I took a fancy to my project. I could not save Anne Ashcombe's daughter from being married for money against her heart, for that had already been done to me and I could not go back and undo it. But I could see to it that the thing was managed the right way round for once, in one house at least, before I die, that the penniless one and the loving one should have each other, and the ambitious matchmakers be sent packing, and the money for once follow the love instead of drowning it. It is a small revenge to take on 50 years, but it is mine, and I mean to enjoy it. And Merwin had risen, and gone to the old woman, and knelt by her chair and taken her withered ringed hand and kissed it, and said nothing, for there was nothing to say, and the Duke had watched the two of them. The old woman who had been made small by the world's arithmetic, and the young one who had nearly been, and had understood that he was not the only one Merwin had healed, that she healed by simply being what she was, and that his aunt, in saving Merwin, had at last, obliquely, after 50 years, been able to save the girl of 19 too. These were the hours no scandal touched, and no lie could reach, and no settlement could reckon. They were the true foundation of the thing, laid quietly all that spring while the tongue gossiped and Cordelia Crail schemed, and when the storm of the scandal broke it beat upon a house already built on rock, and could not move it, though it howled. The Duke of Marchbank had learned, in the 4 grey years, exactly how much the world's noise was worth, which was nothing, and he had learned that spring exactly how much a laugh not snatched back was worth, and a lie found out in a column of figures, and a whoop across a dewy paddock. And an old woman's 50-year grief eased at last, and by that reckoning, the only reckoning he trusted, he was the wealthiest man in the kingdom long before he ever stood at the altar with the gold light on his bride, and he knew it, and was grateful past the telling of it. Every remaining day of his long and quiet and entirely happy life, the weeks warmed into a full green spring, and the Duke of Marchbank, who had reckoned himself a dead man walking through the 4 years past, came slowly and disbelievingly back to life. It happened by degrees, and much of it happened at Marchbank House itself, for he had begun, cautiously, then not cautiously at all, to bring his aunt and her companion out of town to his own estate on fine days, on the wholly respectable pretext that the country air would do Miss Ashcombe good. And it did, but it did him more good still, for it was Merwin who first walked to the great cold shut house and made it warm. She did it without meaning to, and without one false or coddling word. She did not tiptoe about his grief as the world did. She did not avoid the rooms, or lower her voice, or wear the careful funeral face everyone had worn at him for 4 years. She walked through his silent galleries and asked him about the pictures. She stood in the great neglected library and gave a small cry of pure covetous joy at the sight of so many books, and forgot herself entirely, and he watched her move along the shelves with her fingertips trailing the spines like a woman greeting friends. And he thought he had never seen anything so beautiful as Merwin Ashcombe let loose in a library. She found the walled garden gone to ruin, the roses his wife had planted, that he had not been able to look at, that he had ordered left alone to run wild rather than see another hand touch them. And she did not know their history, and she knelt in the weeds in her good new gown and began, absently joyfully, to pull the bindweed off a smothered rose, freeing it. And when he came upon her there his first instinct was the old flinch, the old grief-fury. How dare anyone touch them? And then he saw the rose come free under her gentle hands, saw it lift its choked head to the sun, and the fury died in him, and something eased instead, some not 4 years old, and he came and knelt in the ruin beside her and began, wordless, to pull weeds too. They cleared a whole bed that afternoon, the Duke and the companion side by side in the dirt, not talking much, and when they had done and stood back with their hands filthy and their faces streaked, the freed roses stood up green and living where they had been drowning. And Merwin looked at him with a question in her face, sensing she had touched something and not knowing what, and he said quite steadily, "My wife planted these. I have not been able to look at them in 4 years. I am glad you did not know, I'm glad you simply freed them. And Merwin, understanding at last, did not apologize and did not flee, but reached out, for the first time of her own accord, laid her earth-stained hand over his earth-stained hand, just for a moment, there in the ruined garden his wife had made. And it was the first human touch he had welcomed since the bridge, and he turned his hand and held hers, and neither of them said anything at all, because there was nothing that needed saying. He knew, that day among the roses, that he loved her. He had known it, if he were honest, for weeks. What he did not yet know was how to say it, how a duke says to a penniless companion, without frightening her, without making it a thing of rank and rescue and obligation, without making her feel she was being lifted like a fainting girl from a floor whether she willed it or no. For that was the danger, and he saw it clearly, that she owed him too much already, that she might mistake gratitude for love, or worse, might feel she could not refuse him, that his very power, which let him help her, made it impossible for her ever to meet him as an equal and choose him freely. He wanted more than he had wanted anything, for Merwin Ashcombe to choose him freely. He would rather have lost her than won her out of her sense of debt. So he waited, and he courted her without naming it, and he watched her grow stronger and surer and more herself with every passing week, and he was patient, and it was the hardest and the happiest thing he had ever done. His aunt watched it all with her sharp old eyes and said nothing, for once, which from Lady Wexhampton was its own kind of blessing. But the world does not leave the happy alone, and there were those to whom Merwin Ashcombe's rising fortunes were a bitter draught. Lady Crail had not forgiven the manner of her losing. She had lost a free upper servant, and lost her before the whole of society, and worse, far worse, she had watched that servant, that debt, that shame, taken up by Wexhampton and squired about the country by the Duke of Marchbank, the very greatest match in the kingdom, a man who had refused every mother in London for 4 years, and now spent his Thursdays disputing novels with a nobody in a made-over gown. It was insupportable, it was an affront, and it was above all a danger, for Lady Crail had a daughter to marry. Miss Sophia, brought out this season at ruinous expense, and Miss Sophia's whole value lay in her being the best on offer, and it did not improve a girl's market to have it whispered that a duke had passed over her house entirely to dote upon her mother's charity case. The Crails were not so rich as they appeared. Sir Osbert had left debts. Miss Sophia must marry money, and marry it this season, and a duke's inexplicable interest in Merwin Ashcombe was, to Lady Crail's cold arithmetic, a positive threat to her daughter's prospects and her own solvency alike. She began, therefore, to work. The Duke first felt it as a change in the temperature of the drawing-rooms he had lately begun, for Merwin's sake and his aunt's, to enter again. A coolness, a held breath, conversations that stopped when he came near and resumed too brightly. He was a man long practiced in reading silences, and he read this one and did not like it. Then his aunt came to him one afternoon with her mouth set in a hard line and a folded paper in her hand, and told him plainly what was being said. It was being said, carefully, by no one who could be named, in the passive murmuring voice by which the tongue conducts its executions, that the companion was not what she seemed, that there had always been a question about Anne Ashcombe's girl, that she had been turned out of the Crail household, not lent to Lady Wexhampton, and turned out for cause, that the cause was a matter of stolen trinkets, missing money, an intimacy with a man beneath her. The story shifted in the telling, as such stories do, keeping only its poison constant. That the Duke of Marchbank, poor grieving fool, had been imposed upon by a designing creature who had contrived her fate at the Halverdine ball on purpose, having marked him for a lonely widower ripe for the plucking, and that the whole pitiful spectacle had been a trap, and that old Lady Wexhampton, softened by age, had been gulled into lending it respectability. Poor Marchbank, poor foolish, besotted Marchbank, to be so taken in, and he a duke. There is worse, said his aunt grimly, and unfolded the paper. It was an anonymous letter, sent to her, purporting to be from a former servant of the Crail household, detailing with a wealth of invented particulars the thefts and deceptions of the wicked Miss Ashcombe, and begging her ladyship in Christian conscience to protect the noble duke from ruin. Cornelia Crail's hand is all over it, though she has been too clever to write it herself. She means to destroy the girl, Aldous. Not merely part you, destroy her. Ruin her name so thoroughly that no house will take her. so that when your interest cools, as Cordelia is certain it must, Merwin will have nowhere on this earth to go. It is the cruelty of a woman who cannot bear that a thing she threw away has been found precious by another. And she is good at it. She has half the town believing it already. The Duke read the letter through twice. When he set it down, his hands were very steady, which was in him the most dangerous of signs. Does Merwin know? He asked. Not yet, but she will. These things always reach the one they concern last and hardest. Someone will cut her at a shop, or a card will not come, and she will feel the cold before she knows its cause, and then some kind friend will tell her all, and it will break her heart, Aldous, because she has only just learned to hope. His aunt's old voice shook. She has only just learned to believe the world might be gentle. And now this. The Duke rose. He went to the window and stood looking out over the square, where the plane trees were in full green leaf and nursemaids walked their charges in the sun, and the whole ordinary living world went on. And he thought of a grey woman on a cold floor whom no one would lift, and he thought of the hand that had freed the roses, and he felt the old cauterized deadness in burn away entirely and leave behind something clean and hot and resolved. She contrived the faint, he said softly, not a question, a marvel at the sheer effrontery of it. She starved herself these 3 years, by Lady Crail's own arrangement, and then contrived to faint from it at a ball on the chance a passing duke might lift her. That is the story. That is the story. It is a very stupid story, said the Duke. It requires Miss Ashcombe to have foreseen that I, who had entered no ballroom in 4 years, would attend that particular ball, and would cross the floor when 200 others would not, and would then form a lasting attachment to a fainting stranger. It requires her to be at once a starving invalid and a criminal mastermind. It could only be believed by people who wished very badly to believe it. He turned from the window. But people do wish to believe it, aunt. That is the trouble with the true. It is so much less interesting than the vile. What will you do? The Duke of Marchbank considered, and then, slowly, a thing his aunt had not seen on his face in 4 years appeared there. Not the old brooding grief, and not the hot anger of a man stung, but something colder and older and far more formidable, the settled, patient purpose of a man who has been given at last a thing worth fighting for, and who intends to fight for it with every weapon 4 generations of dukes have left him. I will not defend her, he said. To defend her is to grant there is a charge. One does not defend the sun against the accusation of being dark. He crossed the room, and there was iron in his quiet now. No, I will do 3 things, aunt, and I will do them in order. First, I will find the truth of Merwin's years in that house, the whole documented truth, the physician who was never called, the wage that was never paid, the will that was twisted, and I will put it beyond dispute. Second, I will let Cordelia Crail overreach, as such people always do, for a liar who has had a little success cannot stop, and I will be ready when she does. And third, I will ask Merwin Ashcombe to be my wife, not to shield her. She would refuse a shield, she is too proud, and rightly, but because I love her, and because I should have asked her among the roses and was too much a coward, and because I will not have her learn of this filth believing herself alone in the world, she shall learn of it knowing she is loved. It changes everything to meet a blow knowing you are loved. He picked up the vile letter and folded it away in his breast over his heart like a thing to be kept. Let Lady Crail do her worst. She has reckoned all her life on the world's cowardice, and it has never failed her. She has not reckoned on a man with nothing left to fear. But the world moved faster than the Duke's careful order, as the world, and it was Merwin who felt the cold first, exactly as his aunt had foretold, and it happened before he could reach her with his love as a shield against the poison. He learned of it from a note in Lady Wexhampton's hand, sent by a running footman, 3 lines only, come at once. The girl knows. She is leaving me. I cannot hold her. He was in the saddle before he had finished reading, and he rode into town at a pace that turned heads, and he came to the Grosvenor Square house to find his aunt in the hall, white and shaking with a fury that had no outlet, and Merwin's small trunk already corded by the door. She heard it at the circulating library, his aunt said, from 2 women who did not trouble to lower their voices, believing her beneath their notice. The old error, the one that always undoes them, they cannot conceive she has ears. She heard the whole of it. The theft, the trap, the designing creature, the gold duke. And she came home white as death and would not weep and would not eat and has packed her trunk and means to take the mail coach north to a situation as an under-nursemaid in a manufacturing town where no one knows her name. And she will not hear me, Aldous. She says she will not be the ruin of your house and mine. She says she has brought scandal on the only two people who were ever kind to her, and she will take it away with her. She thanks me and she is leaving and I cannot make her stay. The old woman gripped his arm with a strength that hurt. Go up to her. The blue room. Go up and stop her. I have failed. He went up. She was standing at the window of the little blue room with her back to the door. In her old grey travelling gown. She had put off all the pretty things his aunt had given her, folded them, left them. She had put on again the grey of the poor relation, the grey of the woman who is given the colours no one wants. As though she were putting on again the whole of her old invisible self like armour, and she did not turn when he came in, but she knew him, he saw her shoulders set. You should not have come, your grace, she said. Her voice was very quiet and very steady, the deadly steadiness of a person holding herself together by main force. It is better if you do not. It is better, now if you go, and let it be seen that you have done with me, and then the talk will die of itself, and no more harm will come to you at her ladyship, who has been so good. I am going away. I've thought it all out. It is quite the best thing. I only regret I cannot thank you both as I ought, but I think you understand why I must not be seen to, why I must simply go. Turn around, Merwin, said the Duke. Please do not make me. Now the steadiness cracked, just at the edge. Please. If I turn around I shall not be able to do it, and I must do it, and it is so very hard already. He crossed the room. He did not touch her. He came and stood beside her at the window, close, both of them looking out at the green square, and he let the silence sit a moment, and then he said quietly, They are saying you contrived the feint. She flinched. That you starved yourself 3 years for the chance of it. That you are a criminal and a schemer, and that I am a poor gold fool who was trapped by a designing creature at the edge of a ballroom. He kept his voice level, almost gentle. Have I the story right? Yes. A whisper. It is the stupidest story I have ever heard in my life, said the Duke of Marchbank, and I have sat through 4 seasons of them. And he heard her breath catch, half a sob, half, against all her will, a laugh, and he pressed on, gently, relentlessly. Merwin, look at me. I am not asking you to defend yourself. There is nothing to defend. I know exactly what was done to you in that house and by whom, and I know exactly who is spreading this filth and why, and I promise you on my life that it will not stand. But I did not ride here to argue you out of believing a lie. I rode here because you are about to do the one thing that will make the lie true. Now she turned. Her grey eyes were swimming, her face was stricken, and she looked at him with such despair and such longing and such fixed, hopeless resolve that very nearly undid him. If you run, he said, if you take the mail coach north and vanish into a manufacturing town under another name, then you have confessed. Do you see? An innocent woman with a duke and a dowager at her back does not flee in the night. Only a guilty one flees. You would be handing Cordelia Crail her victory and signing her lie with your own hand, and worse, far worse, Merwin, you would be doing it to spare me. You would be sacrificing your good name to protect a duke, who has more armour than any woman living, and calling it kindness. But it is not kindness, it is the old thing. It is you making yourself small, and taking the blame that is not yours, and slipping away so as not to be a trouble, exactly as you have been made to do your whole life. And I will not have it. Do you hear me? I have watched you learn to sit by a fire without flinching. I have watched you free the roses. I will not stand here and watch you crawl back into the grey and put out your own light, because a cruel woman told a lie about you. I would sooner marry you in the face of the whole scandalized world than let you save me from it. Merwin went utterly still. What did you say? The Duke of Marchbank drew a breath. He had meant to do this differently, with roses, with time, with every careful safeguard against her mistaking gratitude for love. He had none of those safeguards now. He had only a woman in a grey gown about to vanish out of his life, and the truth, and so he gave her the truth, plainly, as she had always given it to him. I said I would marry you. He took her hands, the reddened knuckles were healing now, but he knew their history, and he held them as though they were precious, which they were. Merwin Ashcombe. I have been a dead man for 4 years, and you walked into a ballroom I did not want to be in and fell down at the edge of it, and I have been alive again from the moment I lifted you off that floor, and I did not understand it then, and I understand it perfectly now. I love you, not out of pity. Not to rescue you, you have rescued yourself. You needed only feeding and a fire and someone to tell you that you were allowed to exist. And you did the rest, you and your Latin and your opinions and your terrible taste in the endings of novels. I love the whole of you. I want to argue with you across my table for 40 years. I want you to free every rose in that garden. I did not ask you among the roses because I was afraid you would think you could not refuse a duke, and I have hated myself for that cowardice every day since, and I am done being a coward. So I am asking you now, at the worst possible moment, with your trunk corded downstairs and your name in the mud, when you cannot possibly mistake it for anything but what it is. Because if you say yes now, you say yes to me and not to safety, for there is no safety in it, there is only me. And a fight and a garden. Will you marry me? She was weeping now openly, the tears running down her face, but her back was straight and her chin was up, and she did not pull her hands from his. You cannot mean it, she said. You are a duke. I am a companion with a stolen name and no money and a scandal on me. Every soul in England will tell you it is madness. Then it is fortunate, said the duke, that I stopped listening to every soul in England 4 years ago. Merwin, answer the question, not what you ought to do. Not what is best for me. I forbid you to think of what is best for me. I am a grown man and a duke, and I shall look after myself. Only this, if there were no scandal, and no lie, and no debt between us, if you were an heiress and I a plain gentleman and the whole world approved, what would your answer be? Tell me that, and tell me true, for you have never once told me anything but true, and I will hold you to it. And Merwin Ashcombe looked up at the Duke of Marchbank through her tears, and for a long moment the whole of her old trained caution, the whole armour of the grey, warred in her face with the thing that had grown in her heart since a stranger knelt in the dirt to pull weeds beside her. And then the armour lost. Yes, she said very low, and then again, stronger, as though astonished at her own daring. Yes, if there were no scandal and no debt and the world approved, my answer would be yes, and it has been yes since the roses, and I have been so ashamed of it. Because how could a creature like me love a duke, and not seem to be exactly the schemer they say I am? But you ask me for the truth, and the truth is yes, I love you, I have loved you, and it has been the sweetest and the most hopeless thing. It is not hopeless, said the Duke, and he drew her to him at last, and she came and he held her against his heart as he had held her that first night off the ballroom floor. Only now she was not fainting, now she stood and held him back, her face pressed to his coat. It was never hopeless. Let them talk. Let Cordelia Crail do her worst. You have said yes with your name in the mud and your trunk at the door, which means you have said yes to me and to nothing else, and that, my heart, is the only yes I would ever have trusted. He drew back just enough to look at her, and with his thumb he wiped the tears from her cheek, and he said, unsteadily smiling, a thing he had not done in 4 years now, we are going to go downstairs, and you are going to uncord that trunk, and we are going to tell my aunt, who will pretend to be surprised, and has in fact been planning our wedding since the 2nd Thursday, and then, Merwin Ashcombe, then we are going to fight. Nor was the scheme against Merwin so swiftly turned aside as a bare recital of its ending suggests, and the days of it were dark ones, darker than the Duke let his aunt or his betrothed see, for he carried the weight of the fight so that they need not. In the interval between his proposal in the Blue Room and the collapse of Cordelia Crail's lie at Lady Ellerby's crush, there were weeks in which the poison did its work and the Duke could not yet stop it. He had told Merwin he would ask her to be his wife knowing she was loved, so that she should meet the blow standing, and she did meet it standing, but the blow came all the same and fell hard, and there were mornings in those weeks when he saw plainly what it cost her, and hated the world afresh for making her pay it. For the betrothal once known did not silence the talk, at first it fed it. A designing companion who traps a grieving duke into scandal is a villain. A designing companion who traps a grieving duke into marriage is a triumph of villainy, and the Ton's imagination, which had been half inclined to pity Merwin, now turned and half inclined to fear her, as one fears a clever adventuress who has carried off the greatest prize in England from under the noses of 100 better-born girls. Lady Crail played upon this with real genius. She let it be understood that she was heartbroken, not angry, that she had loved dear Merwin as a daughter and could not think how the girl had repaid her, but that she forgave her, she forgave everyone. She asked only that the world be gentle with poor Sophia, whose own modest hopes had been so cruelly overshadowed. It was masterly. It cast Lady Crail as the wronged and Christian benefactress and Merwin as the serpent in the bosom, and it was very nearly unanswerable, for how does one prove one is not a serpent? The more Merwin bore it with dignity, the more it was said her dignity was cunning. The more she was silent, the more her silence was called guilt. The Duke watched her walk into rooms that went cold at her coming. He watched women she had never harmed turn their shoulders. He watched, once, at the opera, a girl of 18, Miss Sophia herself, put up to it by her mother, rise and leave a box rather than share it with Miss Ashcombe, with a great rustling show of maidenly distress, so that 100 glasses turned. And Merwin sat very straight and very pale beside the Duke through the whole of the second act, and did not once let her chin drop. And it was one of the hardest things he had ever done to sit still beside her, and not stand up in that box and blast the whole vicious spectacle to the ground with a few plain words, for he knew, his aunt had drilled it into him, that a duke's public fury would only seem to confirm that there was something to be furious about, and would make Merwin the object of a scene, which was precisely what Cordelia Crail wished. So he sat still. He sat still, and he took Merwin's cold hand in the dark of the box where no one could see, and held it, and felt it grip his back, and afterward in the carriage she had said, in a small steady voice, "I begin to understand what your 4 years were like. To be looked at and looked away from, and to be a thing the room agrees to see. I am sorry, Aldous. I never truly understood it before, and I am sorry, and I love you, and I will not break whatever they do. I have been through worse than an opera box. I have been through cold and hunger and being no one, and I came out of it, and I will come out of this, and I have you, which I did not have before, so it is not worse. It is only opera boxes." And the Duke had held her, and had thought that if he had loved her before, he loved her past all reason now, this woman who could sit through that and come out of it comforting him. But it was hard, and it wore on her, and he saw it, and there came a night, the lowest of it, the dark hour before the turn, when he found her again by a cold hearth, though this time at Grosvenor Square, in the small hours, and this time not curled small in fear, but sitting very upright, dry-eyed, with a look on her face he liked far less than tears. "I have been thinking," she said, "that there is a way to end it. If I break the engagement, if I release you publicly, and say that on reflection I cannot presume to a station so far above me, and go quietly into some genteel obscurity, then the story loses its point. The adventuress who releases her prize is no adventuress. Sophia's season is saved, your name is cleared, your aunt is spared, and I—" her voice did not shake, which was the worst of it. "I shall do very well. I have done very well before on much less. It is the sensible thing, Aldous. It is the kind thing. I have thought and thought, and I cannot find the flaw in it, except that I do not want to, and my not wanting to is exactly the selfish they accuse me of, so I cannot trust it." And the Duke of Marchbank had knelt down before her chair, he a duke on the cold floor, as he had knelt on the ballroom floor, as he had knelt in the rose bed, and taken both her hands, and said low and fierce, "Listen to me. I know that voice. I have used that voice. That is not kindness speaking, and it is not sense. That is the old thing wearing their faces. That is you making yourself small and slipping away, so as not to be a trouble, and dressing it up as virtue so that you may do it with a clear conscience. And I know the trick, because I did it for 4 years. I called my hiding grief, and my cowardice discretion, and my slow dying a proper respect for the dead, and it was all of it the same lie, the lie that says the world is easier if I make myself less. It is not easier. It is only smaller and colder, and it is a slow way of dying, and I will not let you do it, do you hear me? I will not let you do to yourself what I very nearly did to myself, because I love you too well to watch it. You want to release me, I know you do. I know it is not weakness in you, but a terrible strength, the strength of a person who has learned to bear anything, to give up anything to want nothing for herself. And it is the one strength of yours I mean to break, Merwin, I mean to break it clean. Because it was beaten into you by cruel people for their own use, and it is not virtue, it is a scar they left, and I will spend my whole life teaching you that you are allowed to want, and to keep, and to be a trouble, and to take up room in the world. Now, you will not release me. Not because I command it, I have never commanded you and never will, but because I am asking you for the first time in your life to be selfish, to want a thing purely for yourself and take it, and the thing is me and I am freely given, and it costs no one anything you have any duty to protect. Sophia's season is not your charge. My name is not your charge. My aunt is not your charge. You have carried everyone's weight but your own since you were a child, and I am asking you to set it all down, just this once, and pick up the one thing that is yours. Will you do it? Will you be selfish and keep me? She had wept then at last, the upright dryness breaking, and she had bent her head over their joined hands and wept as he had not seen her weep, not the quiet tears of the blue room, but great racking sobs that shook her whole thin frame. The weeping of 3 years and more, of a whole starved lifetime of never once being allowed to want, and he had gathered her up and held her through it, on the floor by the cold hearth, saying nothing, only holding, until it had passed, and she had lifted her ruined face and looked at him and said, "Spent and clear, yes. God forgive me, yes, I will keep you. I will be selfish and I will keep you, and I will not release you though the whole world shrieks it. Because I want you, Aldous. I want you for myself and no other reason, and I am done pretending I do not." And he had said, "There. That is the truest thing you have ever told me," and had kissed her wet cheek, and had known that the fight was as good as won, not the fight against Cordelia Crail, which was still to come, but the deeper fight, the one that mattered. The fight for Merwin's own soul against the cruel small size the world had cut her to, that she had won. And Cordelia Crail, 3 days later, overreached herself at Lady Ellerby's crush, and named a magistrate who did not exist, and the outward fight was won too in an afternoon, exactly as the Duke had foretold, but he never afterward counted that the real victory had been on the cold floor in the small hours, when Merwin Ashcombe had learned to want, and had wanted him, and had kept him. Everything else was only tidying. Lady Wexhampton was not, in the event, surprised at all, and did not trouble to pretend it. She looked at the two of them coming down the stair hand in hand, and she set down her lorgnet, and she said, "Well, it is about time, Aldous. I was beginning to think you would want prompting, and I had prepared a very cutting speech. Ring for champagne, and then sit down, both of you, and let us make war on Cordelia Crail, for I have not enjoyed myself so much since the old King's Jubilee." The war was won not with a duel or a denunciation, but with the truth, patiently gathered and quietly placed, which is the only weapon that ever truly defeats a lie. The Duke had been assembling it for weeks. Now he finished the work. Mrs. Pardew, the Halverdine housekeeper, proved a most willing ally, for she had loved the girl, and she remembered every fainting fit, and she knew which of Lady Crail's own servants had slipped Merwin bread and could be brought to say so. A physician was found, old Dr. Enderby, who had once been called to the Crail house for Miss Sophia's megrims, and had glimpsed the companion and privately noted her wasted state, and had said as much to a colleague at the time, and would swear to it. Sir Osbert Crail's will was quietly examined by the Duke's own man of business, and it was found that the late baronet had left a sum, not large, but real, in trust for his ward Merwin Ashcombe, to be paid to her at her majority for her maintenance and education, and that Lady Crail, the trustee, had paid out not 1 penny of it, but had drawn upon it these 3 years for her own household while working the girl as an unpaid servant. That was not merely cruelty. That was a crime, and it was documented, and the documents did not lie. The Duke did not shout it from the housetops. He was too clever for that, and he had learned patience in a hard school. He let Cordelia Crail overreach, as he had known she would. A liar flushed with success cannot stop, and she pressed her advantage too far, and put it about at a great crush at Lady Ellerby's, where she believed the Duke and his party would not be present. That Miss Ashcombe had actually been taken up by the magistrates once, and the matter hushed for the family's sake. That was the fatal step. That was a specific, verifiable claim, made before witnesses. And the Duke of Marchbank, who had been present after all, having come in late and unannounced, crossed the crowded room in the sudden silence his arrival always made, and said, very quietly, so that everyone strained to hear, "Lady Crail, you have just said, before these witnesses, that Miss Ashcombe was taken before a magistrate. Name him. Name the magistrate, and the date, and the charge, for I have inquired at every magistrate's office in the county, and no such matter exists, and I should very much like to be corrected. If you can correct me before these witnesses, who have heard you make the claim." And he waited in his terrible courteous silence, and Cordelia Crail opened her mouth, and shut it, and opened it again, and could not, before that ring of avid listening faces, invent a magistrate on the spot. And in her long floundering silence the whole edifice of her lie fell down. The Duke did not gloat. He turned to the room and said, still quietly, that he was glad the matter was cleared, and that he would say once plainly, so that it need never be said again, that Miss Ashcombe was the daughter of his aunt's dear friend, and a woman of unblemished honour, that she had been left a legacy by the late Sir Osbert Crail, which had been withheld from her these 3 years, a matter now in the hands of his solicitors, that she had been half-starved in the guise of charity, as any of Lady Crail's own servants would attest, and that he, the Duke of Marchbank, had asked her to be his wife, and she had done him the very great honour of accepting. Any person, he added in the mildest voice in the world, who wishes to dispute the lady's character may do so with me. I shall be entirely at their disposal. No one wished to dispute the lady's character with the Duke of Marchbank. The matter was, as the phrase goes, closed. The world, which had been so ready to believe the vile, turned in an afternoon, and was now equally ready to be charmed by the true, for the ton loves nothing so much as a romance and a downfall, and here it had both at once. The withheld legacy, the half-starved heiress, the grieving Duke brought back to life by a gentle girl the whole town had stepped over. It was a far better story than the lie, and it had the additional merit of being real. Merwin Ashcombe, who had fainted unregarded at the edge of one ballroom, found herself, before the season's end, the most thought of bride in England, and bore it with a quiet dignity that won even the doubters, for she never crowed, and never cut those who had cut her, and was seen more than once to be gentle to some other overlooked companion at the edge of some other glittering room, which the world found either saintly or unaccountable, and which the Duke found simply holy like her. As for Lady Crail, no thunderbolt fell on her that night, for life is not so tidy. But the matter of the withheld trust was pursued. The Duke saw to that coldly and thoroughly, and she was made to repay it with interest into a settlement from Merwin, which stung her purse when her purse could least bear it. It was not vengeance. The Duke had wanted no vengeance. It was only that a cruelty long hidden had been brought into the light, and cruelty does not prosper in the light. It wants the dark to live. The slower reckoning of the Crail house, and the last quiet meeting between the two women, were still some way off. They were married in the autumn, quietly at the small church on the Marchbank estate, with the roses of the walled garden, freed now, and pruned, and blooming late and glorious in the mild autumn, cut and carried in by the hands of the household to fill the little church with their scent. Lady Wexhampton wept, and pretended it was the draught. Mrs. Pardew was there in her best black, weeping frankly. Merwin wore not grey, but a soft warm gold, the colour of firelight, the colour of the light the Duke had first seen on her face in the dusty pallor, and she carried her father's old Latin Testament in her gloved hands, and when she came up the aisle to him she was not pale, and she did not tremble, and she looked at the Duke of Marchbank with her clear grey eyes level and unafraid, and he thought his heart would not hold what it was asked to hold. He had thought, in the 4 grey years, that his life was a house he must live in for the rest of his days, shuttered and cold, with the fires burning in empty rooms. He understood now that his aunt had been right, that a house is not a grave, that it has doors. Merwin had not made him forget the wife and the daughter he had lost on the bridge. She would not have wanted to, and he would not have let her, and it was one of the 1,000 reasons he loved her that she never once asked him to. Instead, she had done the other thing, the truer thing. She had taught him that the dead grow if we let them, and that grief is not disloyal to joy, and that a heart is not a fixed measure to be spent all on one love and then bankrupt, but a thing that widens, that makes new rooms. He kept Eleanor's nursery in the end, and opened it, and let the light in, and it was Merwin who helped him do it, kneeling with him among his daughter's small forgotten things without a single false word, and it was Merwin who said, when the time came that there was cause to open it for a happier reason, that they would not shut away the old to make room for the new, but keep both, for a house has doors and rooms enough, and love does not run short. But that was later. On the day of the wedding, the Duke of Marchbank stood at the altar of the small stone church, with the autumn light falling gold through the old windows and the scent of the freed roses all about him, and he took the reddened, healing, precious hands of Merwin Ashcombe in his, the hands that had freed the roses, the hands that had held his in the dirt when no one else in 4 years had dared to touch him, and he made his vows in a voice that did not once falter, and heard her make hers in the low warm voice like water over stones, and when it was done he did not care in the least who watched, no more than he had cared at the edge of the ballroom, but bent his head and kissed his wife, gently, before God and the household and his weeping aunt and the late gold roses, and afterward, when the small feast was done and the guests had gone and the great house that had been so long shuttered at last with light in every window, warm and living and full, the Duke of Marchbank walked out with his Duchess into the mild autumn dusk, into the walled garden they had freed together, among the roses his first love had planted and his second love had saved, and he thought of a bright indifferent voice in a glittering room saying she has fallen, and of a woman lying unheeded on a cold floor while the whole world went on dancing, and of the impulse, the single unbidden impulse, that had turned him about and carried him across that floor to lift her, and he understood that it had not been he who rescued her at all, or not only he, that she had lain there like a fallen thing and been in truth the answer he had stopped believing in, the door in the grave house, the hand held out to lift a dead man back into the light, and that of all the choices a duke may make in his life, the greatest by far had been the smallest, to cross a room no one else would cross, and kneel and lift and not let go. He drew her close in the rose-scented dark. Somewhere in the lit house behind them a servant was singing. Merwin leaned her head against his shoulder, warm and living and whole and his, and the Duke of Marchbank, who had been the loneliest man in England, held his wife among the roses and knew that whatever the years to come might bring, this was the beginning of them, and it was enough. Of the humbling of those who had used her ill, the Duke of Marchbank took, in the end, no more than justice required, for he had found that he wanted no cruelty even against the cruel, and yet the reckoning, when it came, was the more complete for being quiet. He saw Cordelia Crail but once more, the following spring, and the meeting told the whole of it. It was at a great assembly to which the Crails had been asked before their fall, and could not now be uninvited, and the Duke came late with Merwin upon his arm, his Duchess now cleared, courted. The marvel of the town, and the room, which not a year before had gone cold at her coming, warmed instead, for the world had turned its coat entirely, and now smiled upon the wronged heiress it had lately shunned, and across that warm bright room the Duke saw Lady Crail, standing a little apart, less attended than she had used to be, her bronze silk a season out of fashion, her daughter beside her unmarried and past her bloom, and he watched Cordelia Crail watch Merwin enter, Merwin in her quiet gown with the Duke's arm beneath her hand, and the whole room's regard upon her, whole and well and radiant and loved, and he saw pass across that hard handsome face, in the unguarded space of a single breath, a thing he had not looked for and did not enjoy, not fury and not fear, but a kind of blank-stricken understanding, the look of a woman who sees, all at once and too late, the exact size of what she threw away and cannot get back. She had had 3 years under her own roof, a girl who could find a cheat in a column of figures, who could run a great estate, who was gentle and clever and brave and worth 10 of the daughter she had ruined a fortune to display, and she had fed that girl on scraps and worked her like a scullion and called it charity, because she had not troubled to see her, and now that girl was a duchess and Cordelia Crail was nothing, and the whole ruin of the Crail house lay not in any stroke the Duke had dealt, but simply in that they had had a treasure and used it for kindling, and the account had come due. Merwin saw her too. The Duke felt the small check in her step, the involuntary tightening of her hand on his arm, the old reflex of fear at the sight of the woman who had held her whole life in a cold fist, and he had been ready, in that instant, to steer her past, to spare her the meeting. But Merwin did not wish to be steered past. She stood a moment and mastered herself, and then she did a thing the Duke had not expected and never forgot. She crossed the little space between them, quite steadily, and she made Lady Crail a curtsy, a correct, cool, faultless curtsy. Exactly the depth owed by a lady to a lady, no less and not 1 inch more, and she said in her clear, low, even voice, so that those near enough could hear, "Lady Crail, I hope Miss Sophia is well. I have always wished her well." And that was all. She did not accuse. She did not gloat. She did not so much as let a barb show. She simply stood before the woman who had starved her, whole and free and unafraid, and was gracious, and the graciousness was more terrible than any accusation could have been, for it showed the whole room, without a word, exactly who the lady was and who the schemer had been, and it left Cordelia Crail with nothing to strike at, no wound to widen, no scene to twist, only the intolerable spectacle of being pitied, gently, by the girl she had tried to destroy. Lady Crail returned some stiff nothing, and Merwin inclined her head and turned and came back to the Duke's side, and he had looked down at her with his heart too full for speech, and she had said, very low, only for him, "There, now I am truly free of her. I did not know I would be, until I did it. One cannot be free of a person one still hates. The hate is a chain. I do not hate her any more. I am only sorry for her, which is the door out." And the Duke had thought that he had known she was clever and known she was brave, but had not until that moment fully known she was wise, and that he had a very great deal still to learn from the woman he had thought he was rescuing. The Crails sank after that, not with a crash, but with the slow certain settling of a house whose foundation has been quietly washed away. The restored trust money went into Merwin's settlement and out of Lady Crail's reach. Miss Sophia's great match never came, and she married at last. Some years on, a respectable attorney of modest means, and was said to be the better and the humbler for it. Mr. Julian Crail's debts caught him up, and the family retired to a smaller house in a duller county and were not much thought of again. The Duke never troubled them further. He had no need. He had learned from his Duchess that the surest punishment of the cruel is simply to flourish beyond their reach gently, without a backward glance, and let them live with the knowledge of what they did and what it cost them. And this the Marchbanks did, all their lives, superbly. And Merwin, once a duchess, did not forget the floor she had lain on. It became known in the years that followed that the Duchess of Marchbank had a particular eye for the overlooked, that every glittering assembly she attended, her glance went not to the brilliant centre, but to the cold edges, to the wallflower, the paid companion, the poor cousin in the turn-gown standing unregarded by the draughty windows, and that she made a point, always, of crossing the room to such a one, and speaking to her kindly, and drawing her in, and that a word from the Duchess of Marchbank could remake a slighted woman's whole evening, her whole season, for the room that had looked past, and nobody looked very hard indeed at anyone the Duchess singled out. She founded in time, with her own settlement money and the Duke's glad backing, a quiet institution, a house in the country where gentlewomen fallen on hard times, orphaned girls, cast-off companions, might come and be fed and housed and taught a means of independence, and go out again equipped to stand on their own feet and be beholden to no cold benefactor for their bread. She ran it herself, with her head for figures, and it never lost a penny nor a girl it could save, and she never once made any of them feel a debt or a shame, for she knew, better than any founder living, exactly how that felt, and she had sworn it should not be felt under her roof. The Duke, watching her at this work, used to think that the impulse which had crossed the ballroom floor to lift her had rippled outward past all reckoning, that a single unbidden kindness in a cold room had multiplied into 100, 1,000, and that the whole of it, the roses freed, the girls saved, the cold edges warmed, had begun with a woman who fell down where no one would help her, and a man too weary of grief to walk on by. The nursery they opened together in the fullness of time, and for the happiest of reasons, and they did not, as Merwin had promised, shut away the old to make room for the new. Eleanor's small forgotten things were brought out into the light, and kept painted horse, a coral rattle, a tiny worn shoe, set on a shelf where the sun reached them, not as a shrine to grief, but as a place kept for a sisterhood gone before, spoken of gently, let to grow in the family's love as the dead grow if we let them. And when at last there was a small, warm weight to be carried through those long-shut galleries, it was the Duke of Marchbank himself who carried it, as he had carried its mother off a cold floor, cradled against the same chest, up the same stairs, into rooms no longer dark, and Merwin, watching from the nursery door, well and strong and unafraid, and cherished past the telling of it, thought that the whole long road from that first indifferent voice saying she has fallen had led, by ways she could never have foreseen, exactly here. And light, and a house full at last, and a man who had crossed a room for her when no one else would, and never once in all the years let go.